Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. This is Haley Cooper, your host, and today I have Carmita of the Surge Institute on the podcast, and I'm so excited that I was introduced to her and her work. She is a leader in the nonprofit space, and I'm just so excited to learn more about her and her work at the Surge Institute, which is all about educating and developing leaders of color who create transformative change for young people, their families, and our broader communities. So welcome, Carmita.
Hi, it's so good to be here, Haley. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I would just love to know, by starting off, tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to the Surge Institute and why this work is so important right now.
Yeah, well, I will admit that my path is a little bit circuitous. So my path to nonprofit leadership actually started with my career beginning as a chemical engineer. And I worked in chemical engineering before going to get my MBA. And through getting my MBA, I really focused on nonprofit leadership, which I got my MBA at Northwestern in the early 2000s when lots of people were focused on investment banking and consulting. And I was the oddball that wanted to use my MBA to change the world and eradicate poverty and do all of these things. So it's beautiful to now be living in a time where social impact and social good is at the forefront for so many folks. But I'll go back a little bit just to let you know, like, how I even got there. So I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up well below the poverty line, single mom. My parents got divorced when I was really young, I think about 2. And my mom suffered a stroke when I was really young that left her permanently disabled. So I lived in housing projects. We experienced homelessness, and access to a really high quality public education was what really was my pathway out of poverty. And I was blessed with an amazing network of family and friends and other folks who never let my current situations dictate what my aspirations would be. And as I got older and I was doing very well in corporate America and other sorts of places, I was doing lots of things in education from a volunteer standpoint. And I realized at a fairly early age in my 20s that I didn't want that to be the work that I did on the weekends. I wanted to make my life's purpose align with my work, if that makes sense. So I decided to leave corporate and start working directly in education. I worked at Chicago Public Schools, and I went to DC and did national nonprofit and policy work before leading another nonprofit, and founded Surge in 2014, really in response to 2 things. One was this lack of, at that time, I saw this lack of representation of folks of color and people who had shared experience with students and families in positions where their fates were being decided. And I saw too many women and folks of color, particularly, not being given access to the sort of investment in talent that is required, not only for them to get those positions, but then to really thrive when they were there. So Surge aims to do that. We are, as you mentioned, a leadership accelerator. We're unapologetic about the fact that we support and invest in leaders of color because the data tells us that we are so woefully underrepresented in leadership, not just in education, but across the social sector. And we know that people need opportunities to really invest in themselves, their leadership, and build community with others so that they sustain when they're in those positions. So that's my path. And it sounds circuitous, but the through line, particularly if you know my personal narrative and personal story, is really about recognizing that I don't believe that I'm an exception or that I was a unicorn. I happen to be a kid who was really identified as gifted and talented and all those sorts of things that was also in poverty. And if I didn't have systems and people around me that really believed in me and saw that my aspirations and abilities shouldn't be depressed based on my zip code or where I lived, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I just want other people to be in positions to make that a reality for students and families who are too often overlooked. Yeah, that's my journey.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I love the transition from chemical engineer navigating into purpose. And I think a lot of people can relate, especially over the last couple of years of evaluating our lives and really wanting to take time to understand what our purpose is in life and really live out our work in alignment with our values and our purpose. And you mentioned a lot about how across the nonprofits, women dominate the sector, but
Mhm.
only a small portion are at the executive level.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure even more for women of color, that portion goes down a lot smaller. And so, how do you, and a lot of nonprofits, like you said, like I found this in my own career, there's a lack of professional development and personal development to help build us up. And I've only had one boss who's been like, you want to be a CEO one day? Here's how we're going to get you to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, how does the Surge Institute come alongside these women leaders and women of color to invest in their leadership abilities?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying, and I think, Haley, what you touched on, I just really want to just hit that because it's so true. I know what's possible because I started my career in places where talent development was really key to leadership development. So I started my career at Procter and Gamble. I've worked at other Fortune 500, 100 companies. And in all of those places, it was very clear the path that I was on. If you're identified as a high potential employee, then you're given mentorship. You have a sort of 3 or 5 year plan that says, oh, okay, you're now a process engineer. You're 3 steps away from potentially being a plant manager, whatever it is. Here are the experiences we want to make sure that you have. Here are the people that are going to invest in you. And it was just very methodical, very methodical to ensure that people were prepared to do well and that they knew where they were going. So that was my experience as a baby coming out of my first professional experiences were grounded in thinking that's how you focused on talent. So when I pivoted into nonprofit and saw that wasn't happening at all, and it particularly wasn't happening, as I said, like for women and folks of color, I just saw that as being a real gap. So at Surge, we are, as I said, really unapologetic about our investment in leaders of color, both women and men, though admittedly, there tend to be a higher percentage of women than men in our programming, but we aren't gender specific as much as we are in terms of other representation. But what we do is we create these leadership acceleration programs that are cohort based. We talk about our work as head, heart, and spirit. So I love that you've dived into the softer side of purpose and calling because while there is, and this is for us the head part, there are specific skills and talents and orientations that are required to lead and drive organizations to great impact. But we understand that heart and spirit work is equally, if not more important for a number of our leaders because so many of us, and Haley, I think this will resonate, have been told that we have to leave aspects of who we are behind
Mm-hmm.
in order to lead at certain levels. And what we say is actually what we do is often leave our power behind when we do that. We leave behind the things that make us uniquely qualified at certain spaces to bring new ideas and innovation and ingenuity into spaces that have been dominated by a lot of sameness. So, what we aim to do is we do a lot of, I think, what people would consider standard professional development. And that's everything from helping people learn negotiation skills and finance and operations and strategic planning. But we're doing all of that in this container that is grounded in the strengths and assets that they bring. We take a strengths-based approach to everything that we do, help people really, I say at our best, Serge is putting a mirror in front of our folks and helping them to see themselves more clearly in ways that allow them to really build community with others in true, authentic ways that allow us to really look for opportunities for collective impact. So this isn't just about a leadership experience that's about getting an individual promoted and all of that. Obviously, we have metrics and we track all those sorts
Yeah.
of things. A comic nerd, so I use this example all the time. Like, we're not about the individual superhero, we're about the Justice League. And like, how do we actually help everyone maximize their potential while also recognizing that they're not in this alone? And so many of these issues that our organizations are trying to face have been dominated for generations and seem to be intractable. And no one leader is going to change that. We have to work collectively. And I think that's what makes what we do really unique and enduring.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And you made so many good points. And I feel like leadership can be so lonely and we feel like we're on this own island by ourselves
Absolutely.
and we don't really know where to throw the net. Like, how do we look for resources? How do we invest in ourselves? There's so many things that are on our shoulder and we need that community and that sense of someone stepping behind us and saying, hey, these are all your strengths. This is what I see in you and this is where you can go. And I think sometimes we just need that to take that step back and look. And I love that you said lead with heart. And I always love when people bring that back full circle, but you really focus on the head, the heart, and the spirit. And you mentioned that there are some skills as a leadership. What have you seen really stand out as those core leadership skills in both the head, the heart, and the spirit?
Yeah, I think I would say, and I'll say some of the skills and I won't try to align them with head, heart, and spirit because I think most of these skills require all of that. Even things like things that may seem like very heady, like something like a strategic planning, as an example. Well, you only really do that well if you are also listening to people around you and you're actually hearing the needs of other people, which gets more to that heart work, right? It means that you value others and you value their insight and their opinions, and you're adaptable enough to be able to weave that into whatever those plans are such that they sustain and have longstanding impact. I think that there is a real ability. So a few other things that I've seen is like ability to motivate and inspire others is such I think, undervalued skill in leaders. It's not just about, the charismatic leader, it's like, how do you actually understand not only yourself and your gifts, but the gifts, strengths, skills of those around you? And how do you allow that understanding to then inspire and motivate people to their highest calling and their best purpose? I think the best leaders do this really well. And I think we'd like to think that we're planting seeds and creating space for leaders to do that. We also, and I think this is particularly important for women and folks of color, is learning to embrace failure and know that it's not fatal. So many of us have this idea and have been taught, and both explicitly and implicitly, that perfectionism is the goal. And the truth of the matter, and I think it was Churchill that said, success isn't final and failure isn't fatal. And I think people who recognize that and are able to recognize that failure is part of the journey, and that when things don't go as planned, there's something to learn there that's actually going to help the next stage. And the people who I see have been most adaptable can shake that stuff off without allowing it to erode their confidence and their belief in self, and their certainty in their strengths are the ones who are able to not only thrive themselves, but support others in that journey as well. So those are a few of the things that come for me as top of mind as I think about the folks in our community who are really thriving and, as I said, inspiring others to do the same.
Yes, I love that. I love that idea of listening to the community, just practicing that art of listening, driving and motivating change in people, and embracing failure, which is so hard to do, but a necessary
So
part of
hard.
growth. And I think it can go between that growth or that fixed mindset, like viewing this as a lesson and an opportunity to move forward. And something that you mentioned around listening to communities, a lot of our work is based on that. And I feel like a lot of nonprofits don't do a good job at listening to their communities. They create programs that they think will drive change, but it ends up not being as effective because it's not what the actual community needs. So how do you empower leaders to drive that change by listening to their communities?
Yeah. So you are, first of all, I just want to affirm your question, because there is so much in our sector that is done, and it's well-meaning work, right? Like it comes from this well-meaning place, but is often really rooted in this deficit narrative about communities and those that we're aiming to serve. And when you come from that place, even as well-meaning as a program or an initiative might be, it often is not going to be embraced or not be sustainable, because it's about fixing someone or something versus recognizing their innate brilliance and genius, and then removing barriers to that. I'll tell you a quick story, Haley. I promise I'm going to answer your question. But an example of when this came to me, I will never forget a moment, and this had to be like 2008 or so. I was chief of staff for high schools at Chicago Public Schools at the time. And I was sitting in a meeting of very senior leaders in our district. And we were talking about unhoused students and the rates of transfer between schools and other sorts, some programming around that. And I had this moment of reflection where I sat back and I thought, I am very clearly the only person in this room that has ever been homeless. And it's clear to me because while all of these people are super well-meaning, there's no toxicity here, any of that. So much of the solutions that they're coming with are based on some things that they believe are true about the greatest aspirations of these students, about the role their families are playing in their lives. And I just thought, they wouldn't think this about their own children, but they assume that this is the case because these students happen to be homeless right now, but don't recognize that these students are not a monolith. And therefore, you can't assume that their parents are unemployed, or you can't assume all these things. So I use that as my own way. It's important for me to show up in all of my truth and tell all of my stories, because in doing so, I think it invites other people to do the same. And that is exactly what we hope to inspire in our leaders. Like, we believe a necessary precursor to leaders doing the work of inviting in stories and the knowledge and wisdom from communities is them recognizing that within themselves, right? Like, they've got to actually be comfortable with their own truth. If you haven't done your own work, and if you aren't willing to show up in spaces in the fullness of who you are, it's very difficult for you to invite anyone else to do the same. So that's where we begin our work. But we also have a liberatory design component of what we do, which invites people to take on a challenge that they see in their organizations or their communities. And we call them sort of capstone or freedom dreams projects. But the way that we anchor that is through a lens of equity and through a lens of understanding, okay, this is a problem that you say exists, but what have you done to actually get to the root of who's being impacted by that problem? And how is their voice embedded in your solution? How has it influenced what it is? And how have you tested that potential solution with those that you say are most impacted by this problem? So ultimately, I think I would summarize by saying, obviously, we start by focusing on the self and really helping leaders to do that work because we think, as I said, it's a necessary precursor to do that as a leader. We also model ourselves what it looks like to show up in that fullness and as an opportunity for them to really see, oh, that's a way to authentically get people to show up as themselves. And then we take them through a process of learning that asks the question and has a design that is rooted in equity of voice, equity of experience, to get to solutions that we think really lean into tapping into the genius and brilliance of those that you are solving for, so that it becomes solving alongside and with.
Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs. Helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. Oh, that's so good. I love that you talk about bringing out the innate brilliance in everyone and focusing on that and really focusing on the strengths. And I would love to talk a little bit more about like equity and voice, because obviously with listening with our community and asking in storytelling, there has to be an ethical and equitable component to it. Because I was in somewhere the other day and there was a lot of re-traumatization of people telling their stories. And so we have to be mindful that these are people's lived experiences. And it can be really traumatizing to then have to tell it over and over again, the same story, and relive that experience. What does that look like with equity of voice? What does that framework look like to make sure that people feel safe and supported in sharing their stories and having it from their voice?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of this, I believe it is imperative for all of us as leaders to create a space of psychological safety. That's got to be created for your staff, for your team. And if you're not creating it in-house, like inside your organization, you certainly won't be able to create it as you're seeking to go into community and those sorts of things. So that I start there because I think that understanding that psychological safety is a requirement in order for people to allow that innate, as I talk about it, as innate genius and brilliance to shine through. I think we also have to, and I hope I don't step on any toes when I say this, but we also have to be honest with ourselves about when we are seeking to learn from those in community versus when we're seeking to use or leverage their stories to advance some agenda we've already identified. Because people, let's be real, Haley, people can smell BS from a mile away, right? So if you're seeking to have people tell their story to advance some agenda or solution that you've already identified, that is extractive. That's not about actually helping them. And so the work before you even go into people sharing their stories is really interrogating, okay, why do we need to hear this? And what is it that we're aiming to do, learn? How is this benefiting those that I'm asking to share these stories? What is it that they are actually receiving out of this? Because If it's just an opportunity to tell the story, maybe they need a therapist for that. Maybe they don't need it. So, and asking, and once you do all of that interrogation and you feel like you can, with confidence, clarity, and consciousness, say, okay, this is not extractive. This is about building and supporting, getting to solutions that are really going to support these individuals, their broader communities. Then you have to actually be in relationship with them enough to understand what they require to be psychologically safe. Because that answer is going to be different for different folks. Like for some folks, I might need to only talk on a one-on-one. Like I may need to be in a place where that's the way that I feel comfortable sharing that. And I need to share it with someone who has some proximity to my story or that sort of thing. For other folks, it's like, actually, I would be most safe if you allowed me to write something anonymously. So those are examples, but I think first is the requirement to me is the interrogation of intent. And then once you can, as I said, with clarity and confidence and consciousness, say, okay, the intent is pure, all that sort of stuff, then asking those that you're seeking to learn from and alongside, what do you need in order to feel safe? And be okay with the fact that might not align with your initial thoughts or recommendations about how you might move forward and make and be adaptable based on what they need.
Well, so good. I love that you talk about psychological safety and like that innate agenda, that what are you trying to get out of this situation and how do you create that safety within your own organization? I always say, and I say it on every podcast episode now, that fundraising is an inside job. And that it starts with that psychological safety and connection inside. Because if you don't have that within your organization and not everyone's on the same page of where you're going and what that innate agenda is, then it's not going to be portrayed correctly
Oh,
outward.
yeah. Yeah. Haley, I have to tell you, I just said this to someone last week, a couple weeks ago, because they said to me, like, well, you are just a great fundraiser. And because they were asking me for some advice, and they're like, well, you wouldn't understand because you're a great fundraiser. I created the space for them to speak their truth and all of that. And I said with them, do you realize that before I founded Surge, I hadn't had to raise money before. I had observed others do it. Well, that's not totally true. I was CEO of another nonprofit, but we did mostly event-based fundraising. So it was a very different kind of thing. But what I said that aligns with your reflections is the thing that makes you believe that I'm a really great fundraiser is that at my core, I am driven by relationships. Like I am a person that I want to see and understand who you are. I want to know what your wildest dreams are. And I am like that, whether you're a potential funder or whether you're somebody I meet at a block party. And so I see fundraising as being at its core about relationships and identifying places where we have shared priorities, we have shared visions of the impact that we want to have in the world. And look, I'm not going to be Pollyanna about it. Obviously, I've got to be able to speak your language and talk about what we do and the impact that we have in a way that aligns with a potential funder's priorities and all those things. But I think the more we demystify some of these things about what makes it an inside job, the more people will see it as something accessible, right? Because if you can build relationship, you can build relationship. If you can talk to a stranger at a bar about something, like you more than likely can talk to a funder about what it is that you're passionate about and rally and inspire them towards your cause.
Yes, totally. And I think a lot of people think like they forget like fundraising is about relationships and building those relationships with donors and funders, but it's also about relationships inside.
Yes.
And creating, you have to build relationships with your program team if you want to get the stories, or your finance team if you want the budget. It starts with those relationships and not just continuing to push towards the outcomes. And I love the question that you ask, because I ask this of people that I meet: what do you need to feel safe and supported in this moment? And a lot of people have never been asked that question. It's, what do you need? Oh, I need professional development. I need a budget for this. But it's, what do you actually need to feel safe and supported to do your job?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't take time to reflect on that. And I think as we're talking about building relationships in the organization, obviously over the last couple of years, diversity has become a huge thing on adding people to the board or the organization representing communities, but there isn't this sense of belonging once people are added. So how do you navigate those situations and really instill this idea of belonging in organizations?
Yeah, I have a lot of leaders of organizations ask me about this all the time, obviously, because we are on the side of preparing the leaders. But then I will have leaders within organizations say, okay, how do I make sure it's great? People will go through Surge and they'll feel great and all of that. They'll build community. But then how do I ensure that my organization is a place where they will stay? And that's where I've been talking a lot about psychological safety a lot recently, because I think that sometimes that's an important place to start, even beyond talking to people about diversity and equity, because sometimes people think they know what that means. Like, and it can become a performative thing. It's just about, oh, we want a number of faces represented around the table, right? And it's like, how many women can we count? How many Black or brown or Asian faces can we count? But when you really start to get to asking people, how are you ensuring that people feel comfortable taking risks in your organization? Like, how do you invite people to disagree without disrespect? What are your processes for debriefing after? And these are basic questions. But when you ask, you can usually within 3 to 5 questions, I can figure out whether it's an environment where there truly is a space of inclusion or belonging, because it isn't just about the performative stuff. It's not just about hiring some people, putting an affinity group together, and doing all these things. And I hate to say that, so it sounds like I'm belittling those efforts. Those are necessary, but not sufficient, right? Like, it's great to put some very specific goals in terms of diversifying your team and all those sorts of things. But then how are you inviting them to bring themselves into that team? So, and I'll use Surge as an example, right? So we are an organization that our entire staff identifies as folks of color, but I am a Black woman. I am a cis heterosexual Black woman, that I recognize that I have to be focused on creating an environment where people feel like they are included. And I sometimes get that really right and sometimes don't. We as a staff had to take ourselves through a number of trainings around gender inclusivity, because we recognized that we were a pretty heteronormative organization. And there was some language that we were using and other sorts of things that did feel isolating for some people who maybe were more fluid or had different identities or how they showed up. So I think you have to be a learning organization that isn't afraid to get it wrong. And you have to create the space for people to tell you what they need in order to feel safe, seen, and like they can bring the fullness of who they are. And if at any point you're going to get defensive about that or any, you're probably not doing it right.
Hey there, podcast family. If you're like me and deeply committed to improving your leadership skills and fostering better connections with your team, I've got something truly amazing to share with you. I'm proud to introduce the EMC Masterclass, something I talk about often as a certified trainer. It's an incredible program developed by the renowned Dr. Lola Gershfeld, an organizational psychologist and corporate emotional connection expert. You might remember her from a podcast episode where she shared invaluable insights into the world of emotional connection. Dr. Gershfeld's EMC Leaders courses are designed for anyone working with people, whether you're a manager, supervisor, team leader, educator, coach, mentor, or a team member. This program is truly for everyone looking to enhance their communication and collaboration skills to raise more revenue for their mission. Now, let me tell you why the EMC Masterclass is a game changer. Dr. Gershfeld's groundbreaking emotional connection process has been integrated into top universities' curriculum and recognized by international organizations like ICF, HRCI, and SHRM. Humans are wired to seek emotional safety, and when we feel safe, we're more likely to take risks, share innovative ideas, and collaborate effectively. The EMC process is the catalyst for creating that emotional safety within your team. The virtual EMC masterclass consists of 8 modules with 4 hours of expertly recorded material, 13 quizzes to reinforce your learning, and a workbook filled with activities for offline practice and something I still refer to daily. Ready to become an emotional connection master? Dr. Gershfeld is offering an exclusive detail for our podcast listeners. Use the code LEADWITHHEART to enjoy a generous 10% discount on the EMC Masterclass. Head over to emcleaders.com and enroll in the EMC Masterclass today. Oh, what a bigger impact we could make if we really focused on creating that environment of psychological safety where people could bring their whole self and take risks on behalf of the organization. I think it would be so much more productive if we take that step back. And I love that you really focus on that and are really attuned to that within your own organization.
Absolutely. And we still have work to do, right? Like we looked at there of my exec team. As I said, I'm African American. There are, of the 4 of us on the exec team, there are 4 folks who identify as Black and 1 Afro-Latina. So we were like, we got some stuff that we need to do to make sure that our Latina and Latinx folks on our staff feel like they are showing up equally in our work and are represented, and also feel comfortable to drive us toward the impact for their communities. So I say this because I don't ever want to come off preachy as the person who's telling everybody else to do stuff that we're also not struggling with. I think particularly in running an organization that's all folks of color, folks think, I bet you've got it like you. And it's no, because we suffer from some of those same blind spots that others have. And we've got to be a continuous improvement organization that's not afraid to say, hey, here's where we need to continue to learn and grow. And I encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, I thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability and honesty. And I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that. And that's why I love having these conversations that are just real and raw, and people are sharing their own experiences so that we all feel less alone. And we've talked a lot about psychological safety, looking strength-based approach. And if an organization or nonprofit leader is listening to this right now, what are 1 or 2 steps based on this whole conversation, that actions that they could take today within their own organization?
I would first start with, hopefully in your organization, you have some people or HR, some area of your organization that has built trust that could actually start by doing a really simple survey of your current team to really try to get an assessment of like, how inclusive of an environment are you really? And by that, and I'm getting to your point, Haley, around belonging. And you can ask like very simple questions about, and do this anonymously, how comfortable do you feel showing up fully as yourself in the workplace? If not, what are the things that are barriers to that? And just some easy internal surveying done anonymously and perhaps facilitated externally so that you get away from some internal bias and you create some safety for people in the process would be a really good way to identify where you're starting from, to actually say, here's our baseline. And if you structure that in the right way, it'll likely identify some action areas. Hey, is this a culture issue that is more unspoken versus spoken? Are these like some specific restrictions that we have that could easily be changed? Are there things that are impacting certain populations more than others? Do I have policies in place that impact people who are parents more than they impact people who are not caretakers? That would be like my very first suggestion to anyone, is to start where you are. Understand where you are as an organization, where you have gaps. And that's not just counting the heads in your organization. How many women do we have? No, get beneath that to understand what are the things that are really standing in people's way, and recognize that this is not a nice to do. Like my greatest, as I'm coaching other leaders, I feel like my greatest contribution is to get people to understand that this work has a direct correlation to your overall impact. And if you can get people really comfortable in their workplace, they will show up as the highest forms of themselves and in a way that's truly committed to your organization. Not only does that decrease things like turnover, increase retention, happiness, all those sorts of things, it also will increase your bottom line. So that's where I would suggest folks start. I think then you've got to actually make it actionable and be really communicative. This is not the work that you do in a back office that only 3 people know about. You've got to make it an organization-wide and understood aim that people can buy into and see themselves as part of. And I really believe that work is what is going to transform what it feels like to operate in our sector over the next 10 to 20 years.
Yes, I love that. And I know we don't want to focus on the bottom line, but ultimately by doing this work, like you said, it will help us be more impactful. And I have another podcast guest, Mina Das, who does a lot of work around equitable surveys and how to make people feel inclusive and then communicate it back to either your employees or the community. So if you want to go check out that podcast episode, I don't remember what whoever's listening to this, but you could check her out. And I'll obviously check out Carmita, who both talk a lot about how to make this survey more inclusive and equitable. So you said that you love to ask this question of people. So I want to reflect it back to you. What is your wildest dream?
Oh my goodness. Wait, nobody ever asked me this question. I'm just going to say this in draft form versus trying to be perfect with it. My wildest dream is for everyone, but particularly young people, to be free. And what I mean by that is I dream of liberation. It's part of growing up in Birmingham, Alabama. I dream of people being able to have barriers removed from them accomplishing their wildest dreams, whatever those things are. I believe that the future of our nation, the future of our democracy, frankly, the future of the world depends on the ingenuity, innovation, and brilliance of young people. So if we can all remove the barriers that exist to them thriving and being seen as whole and living into their wildest aspirations, then I will die a happy woman, Haley.
Well, you are doing that work and you are making that change. And I'm so grateful for you and this conversation. If people want to learn more about the work that you do or more about you, where can they connect with you?
We are on all the socials. You can go to surgeinstitute.org to find us, to find our website. But we're at Surge Institute on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. That's SURGE Institute. And you can find lots of videos on YouTube, our YouTube channel. So all the socials, you'll find lots about not only what we do, but how we do it, the impact that we're having, and ways that you can engage with us.
Well, thank you so much, Carmita. You have been such a gift to me, and I'm sure a gift to everyone who is listening to this. I know everyone will appreciate this conversation as much as I do. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Haley.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.